Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with Stuart Skelly, who's one of our senior consultants here at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider Talk Cyber. So today Stuart and I are going to be talking about the consultation that was announced by the UK government in January into some proposals by the Home Office that relate to increasing its control and visibility of ransomware attacks. And this includes suggestions that certain organisations be banned by law from making ransom payments to cyber attackers, and that other organisations be required to notify the government if they are subject to a ransomware attack. So, first of all, Stuart, can you remind us what is meant by ransomware and a ransomware cyber attack?
Yes, sure, Annie. Ransomware is a particularly nasty and cynical use of malware or malicious software implanted onto a victim organization's IT system, often by way of a link in a phishing email or maybe a malicious pop-up. And it has the intention to, firstly, prevent, including by means of encryption, the victim from accessing their systems or data. So it's a denial of access, first and foremost. Secondly, to impair the use of systems or data. And thirdly, as an alternative, to facilitate the theft of data held on victims' systems or devices, something that's called exfiltration, all for the purposes of extortion, that is, extorting money out of the victim. The threat actors, once they've installed the ransomware malware, then demand a ransom. This is often in the form of a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, because it's untraceable, for the return or non-destruction and or non-publication of the ransomed data. Though payment of the ransom doesn't even guarantee that outcome. Probably the most notorious example of the use of ransomware was the WannaCry attack, which occurred a few years ago, back in 2017. And that WannaCry affected over 300,000 computers in 150 countries worldwide, including within the NHS here in the UK. But there have been more recent attacks in the last 2 years, including against Royal Mail and Capita. They were both in 2023, and quite a well-known ransomware attack against the British Library last year in 2024. Now, this consultation is part of the government's wider work on cyber security, and it should be seen in the context of wider reform. For example, the Home Office notes that it'll work with the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, or DSIT, as it's often called, so that its proposals are aligned with the upcoming Cyber Security and Resilience Bill, which was announced in the King's Speech in July of 2024. In the King's Speech last year, the government pledged to introduce a Cyber Security and Resilience Bill to expand the scope and application of cyber requirements in the UK, increase regulatory powers to oversee compliance, and to increase incident reporting, including following ransomware attacks. So this Home Office ransomware consultation appears to be meeting part of this promise, and it could potentially be separate to the Cyber Security and Resilience Bill or included within it. Wider consultations on the bill are expected in 2025. The exact contents and direction of the bill remain unconfirmed, but it's generally expected to update the UK's NIS framework, which is the Network and Information Systems regime in this country. And it may align it more closely with the EU's NIS2 directive, which has a broader scope and more extensive obligations, including faster reporting of incidents, and which was intended to become law in all of the member states of the Union by October of 2024. As stated, though the Home Office has indicated it will work with the DSIT, the Department of Science, Information and Technology, to ensure that their proposals are aligned and complementary to those in the anticipated bill, it remains to be seen what the bill will entail and how these proposals will interact.
Thanks, Stuart. So What is the first of the proposals that the government is seeking responses to in this consultation?
Well, firstly, it proposes a targeted ban on ransomware payments by so-called critical national infrastructure, or CNI, organisations and all public sector bodies. This would prevent by law organisations in the UK public sector and owners or operators of CNI from making a payment in response to a ransomware incident.
And what's meant by critical national infrastructure organisations, Stuart?
Well, the government defines CNIs as those critical elements of infrastructure, namely assets, facilities, systems, networks or processes, and the essential workers that operate and facilitate them, the loss or compromise of which could result in one, major detrimental impact on the availability, integrity or delivery of essential services, including those services whose integrity, if compromised, could result in significant loss of life or casualties, taking into account significant economic or social impact, and or two, significant impact on national security, national defence, or the functioning of the state. The Network and Information Systems Regulations 2018, those NIS regulations I mentioned earlier, that the government intends to replace with its proposed Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill, apply to essential services in the transport, energy, water, health, and digital infrastructure sectors. Currently, only central government departments are banned from paying ransoms to ransomware hackers. This first proposal in the Home Office's current consultation would extend this embargo to all UK public authorities and owners and operators of critical national infrastructure, and potentially critical suppliers to those organisations as well.
And what are the other proposals that the government has put out to consultation?
The second government proposal is for a broader ransomware payment deterrent scheme, whereby any victim of a ransomware attack would have to report their intention to make a ransomware payment to the government before paying over any money. After such a report is made, the relevant authorities, such as the National Crime Agency, would review the proposed payment to determine whether there's a reason it needs to be blocked, for example, where the money could go to attackers who are sanctioned persons or entities, or if it would violate terrorism finance laws, and then provide advice and guidance to the organisation. Information gathered from reports would feed into government intelligence to support investigations and or operations to combat future ransomware attacks. The other aspect of this part of the consultation is that the government will consider any relevant thresholds that could apply under this proposal. For example, maybe a simplified process for SMEs. And the third and final proposal from the government is the setting up of a reporting regime for all ransomware incidents. In other words, requiring victims to report incidents to the government regardless of the victim's intention to pay a ransom. After all, the government can't help and advise organisations which have received ransomware demands if they're not aware of these. And this universal obligation to report will greatly assist the government in getting a handle on the true scale of the problem, whether particular types of organisation or sectors are being targeted, etc. The government's also considering whether a reporting threshold should also apply to this new duty. For example, based on minimum turnover or number of employees of the ransomware recipient, their sector, and the amount of ransom sought, or whether just all incidents should be reportable in this way. The government's proposal is to have a staged reporting timeframe of, firstly, an initial report within 72 hours of becoming aware of the ransomware, informing the government of a ransom demand, whether the victim can recover from their existing resilience measures, and if the ransomware cyber attacker group is identifiable, and then a detailed report within 28 days, informing the government of the vector of access, whether resilience measures have been implemented by the victim, and any further details of the attack.
So I think everyone would agree that cyber attackers who implant denial of service or exfiltration malware onto an innocent organization system and then demand a ransom to remove or deactivate it are very serious criminals. So you'd think it would be a no-brainer to prevent organizations from effectively encouraging this really serious, dangerous, antisocial type of hack by paying ransoms. But I get the feeling it's maybe not as simple as that, is it, Stuart?
No, you're right. It's not a straightforward matter, Annie. As you've said, it's a serious problem. According to the Home Office, an estimated $1 billion flowed to ransomware criminals globally in 2023, and that figure has to be a rough estimate because of the secrecy involved in this topic to date, which the proposed legal reporting requirements are intended to combat, of course. With millions of that $1 billion coming from UK organisations which paid ransoms. And the NCSC, the National Cyber Security Centre, considers ransomware attacks to be the most disruptive and highest risk cybercrime. The Cybersecurity Breaches Survey in 2024 found that half of businesses reported experiencing at least one cyber attack, and also that nearly half of businesses already have a policy not to pay ransoms. The Home Office's ransomware proposals seek to stem the flow of that money, as well as disrupt threats to the UK's critical national infrastructure, as mentioned earlier. Blocking companies from making these payments may reduce the flow of the money and make it less profitable for the cyber criminals, but this, of course, may be at the expense of very valuable data that's being ransomed, which has been encrypted, and if it's not available from any backup, may never be recovered if a ransom is not paid. Regulators in the UK already advise companies not to make ransom payments, and solicitors have been told by the data protection watchdog, the ICO, and the Law Society that they should advise their clients accordingly. The ICO has also made clear that paying a ransom will not mitigate the effects of any linked personal data breach, for example, by reducing any fine payable. But some organisations see making such payments as just a commercial reality, and in some cases a necessity. Helpfully, the Home Office in its consultation acknowledges that commercial reality of ransom payments and confirms that if the proposed payment isn't blocked by the authorities, it is for the victim to decide whether to proceed. Still, what about the scenario where a relevant authority advises on non-legally binding grounds not to make a payment, but the organisation does so anyway? How will that ignoring of the official advice not to pay up affect an organisation's ability to claim on its cyber insurance, for example? And will the decision to pay reflect negatively on any subsequent investigation into or future dealings with the business by insurers or regulators or other authorities? Conversely, if an organisation chooses not to pay a ransom on the advice of the government, will that decision in any way act as mitigation in any enforcement action relating to any resultant personal data breach? A ransomware event is stressful enough as it is, but businesses in the UK will, assuming the proposals are taken forward in something approaching their current form, now have a range of additional factors, both legal and strategic, to consider. In particular, the government's thinking is that if bad actors know that certain critical infrastructure and public organisations cannot legally pay a ransom, they'll just stop targeting those entities. However, that position arguably overlooks the nature, motive and approach of many of these actors who often choose targets in order to make a statement or just to cause mischief. The consultation has the laudable aim of seeking to disincentivise expensive and potentially devastating attacks on public bodies. However, it remains to be seen how effective this will be, particularly given that certain threat actors, as stated, often have non-financial motives. For example, state-sponsored bad actors, and whether this might inadvertently lead to an increased number of attacks on private sector organisations. The law of unintended effects must never be forgotten when legislating in areas like this where multiple rights, for example, rights to privacy, to health, to being kept safe and secure, morality and commercial pragmatism overlap and often conflict. And there's also the potential danger of dual reporting developing for those organisations which are already subject to the NIS regime. That is under the UK's existing NIS regulations, as well as the new rules. Although the government has said that its intention is that UK victims of ransomware attacks will be required to report an individual ransomware incident only once, avoiding the risk of dual notification under the NIS rules. However, if a ransomware attack also affects personal data, as it almost certainly will, victims will also be obliged to notify the privacy regulator, the ICO, on a similar 72-hour timeframe, as well as to communicate with seriously affected data subjects without undue delay. Finally, there's the question of how what is effectively a new statutory government notification and licensing regime will impact the millions of companies doing business in the UK, many based in jurisdictions which do not have equivalent legal obligations to those proposed, and many of which receive, and in some cases pay, such demands. How this will affect the UK's attractiveness as a place for tech sector and other businesses to invest in.
Thank you, Stuart. It does sound like there's a lot to consider with this one. And I imagine a lot of the organisations listening to this podcast might have their own opinions on this. So when does the consultation end if people want to send in a response to the Home Office?
So it closes on the 8th of April, Annie. So organisations have until then to provide their input. To respond to the consultation, just visit the government's website online at gov.uk. and simply tap policy papers and consultations into the search engine on the homepage, and that'll take you to the correct page where the ransomware consultation is listed, among many others. To submit a response, you have three options. Either click on a link to fill in a pre-populated survey questionnaire, which the site says should take you about 30 or 40 minutes, or send the Home Office an email to the address provided, or there's even a postal address if you want to mail in your response on paper, having taken out a personal loan to purchase a first-class stamp.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Stuart. It's going to be really interesting to see what comes out of this, I think, for all organisations. So thank you for taking the time to talk to me today, and thank you everyone for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.